wind coming off the main river carries a bitter, biting chill through the streets of Frankfurt. It is late November, 1901. The bare branches of the trees scrape against the heavy stone facade of the municipal asylum for the insane and epileptic. To the locals, this imposing fortress-like structure is known by a much darker name. They call it the Irrenschloss, the Castle of the Insane. Walking up the wide stone steps is a man named Karl Detter. He is a railway clerk, a man used to the rigid, predictable schedules of the German locomotive system. But nothing in his life is predictable anymore. Beside him is his wife, Auguste. She is 51 years old. By all conventional standards of the era, she is in the prime of her middle age. She does not look like someone who belongs behind the locked doors of the Irrenschloss. But for the past several months, Karl has watched the woman he married 28 years ago vanish into a terrifying, unreachable landscape. It started with subtle changes. Auguste began accusing Karl of adultery, her mind constructing elaborate, unfounded jealousies. Then, the domestic rhythms of their life began to fracture. She would stand in her kitchen, surrounded by ingredients, entirely unable to remember how to cook meals she had prepared thousands of times. She began hiding objects around the house, purposely burying household items in corners and drawers with a fierce protective paranoia. She looked out the windows and saw her neighbors as assassins, convinced strangers were plotting to murder her. Then came the nights. Auguste stopped sleeping. She would drag their heavy bedsheets out of the house into the freezing darkness, wandering the grounds wildly, screaming for hours into the blackness of the midnight sky. Karl is exhausted. He cannot work his shifts at the railway and protect a wife who requires constant vigilant supervision. He has brought her here because he has no other choice. Awaiting inside the heavy doors of the asylum is a 37-year-old doctor named Alois Alzheimer. He is a methodical, studious Bavarian psychiatrist and neuropathologist. In the year 1901, the medical establishment views the decay of the human mind through a very specific lens. When people grow old and lose their memory, it is categorized broadly as senile dementia. It is not considered a specific physical disease. It is viewed as a natural, unavoidable wearing out of the body, or worse, a moral failing, a weakness of the spirit. But Auguste Detter is only 51. She defies the standard medical narrative. She is far too young to be experiencing the natural decay of old age. When Dr. Alzheimer first walks into her room, he does not see a hysterical woman or a moral failing. He sees a medical mystery. He pulls up a chair. He opens his notebook. He prepares to document everything. Auguste is sitting in her bed, holding a deep, puzzled expression on her face. She looks at the doctor, her eyes searching for an anchor in a room that feels entirely foreign. Alzheimer begins the interview, his pen scratching across the paper, recording the exact dialogue that will survive for more than a century. He asks, "What is your name?" Auguste looks at him. She replies, "Auguste." Alzheimer writes it down. He asks, "Family name." She hesitates, the gears of her memory slipping. "Auguste." He presses gently. "What is your husband's name?" She looks down. "I think Auguste." She is answering to her husband's name. Alzheimer hands her a pencil. He asks her to identify it. She can name the pencil. She can name a key. She can name a cigarette. The labels of the physical world are still intact. But then he asks her to write her own name on the paper. Auguste grips the pencil. She brings the lead to the page. But the signal between her intention and the muscles in her hand is broken. She tries, stops, and looks up at the doctor. She utters a phrase that strikes at the very terror of her condition. She says, "I have lost myself, so to speak." She is trapped in the agonizing space between knowing and forgetting. She is entirely aware of her own vanishing.
As the weeks pass, Alzheimer watches her condition deteriorate. She wanders the wards, accosting other patients, her mood swinging violently from intense anxiety to withdrawal to sudden defensive anger. When Alzheimer attempts a physical examination, she recoils in terror, screaming, "I will not be cut! I do not cut myself!"
The reality of psychiatric care in the early 20th century is brutal and deeply tied to economics. Karl Dieter is a working-class man. The specialized care at the Frankfurt Asylum is expensive. As the months turn into years, the financial burden becomes unbearable. Karl reaches his breaking point. He makes formal requests to the asylum administrators to have his wife transferred to a cheaper, less specialized facility. Alois Alzheimer realizes the stakes. If August leaves the Uranschloss, her medical history will be lost to the chaotic, undocumented wards of a state poorhouse. He cannot let this happen. He intervenes. He approaches the asylum directors and Karl Dieter with a calculated, unyielding proposition. The institution will keep August. They will provide her care, shelter, and supervision for the remainder of her life entirely free of charge. But in exchange, Alzheimer demands two things. He demands permanent, unrestricted access to her medical records, and upon her death, he demands absolute ownership of her brain. The contract is drawn, the deal is struck. A woman's final, agonizing years are bartered for the promise of scientific revelation.
In 1903, Alois Alzheimer leaves Frankfurt. He accepts an invitation to move to Munich, joining the laboratory of Emil Kraepelin, one of the most prominent psychiatrists in Europe. But Alzheimer never truly leaves August behind. From his new post in Munich, he monitors her decline from afar, reading the detailed reports sent by the staff at the Frankfurt Asylum. The reports paint a grim picture. August descends deeper into the void. She loses all capacity for language. She becomes completely mute, curled in a permanent fetal position, beset by the physical decay that inevitably follows total mental collapse. Finally, on April 8, 1906, at the age of 55, August Detter's body surrenders. The immediate cause of death is sepsis, a massive systemic infection originating from a severe bedsore. The notification is sent via telegraph to Munich. The terms of the contract are invoked.
In the basement of the Frankfurt Asylum, the autopsy is performed. Auguste's brain is carefully removed from her skull. It is preserved, packed securely into a heavy wooden crate, and loaded onto a train bound to Munich. This wooden box, rattling across the German countryside on the rail lines, holds the key to redefining human aging. It holds the physical evidence that will tear down centuries of assumptions about the mind. The crate arrives at Kraepelin's laboratory. Alzheimer takes possession of the tissue. He is standing on the precipice of a paradigm shift. He prepares the brain for microscopic examination. He slices the tissue into impossibly thin sections. To see the hidden architecture of the cells, he utilizes a newly developed chemical technique called the Bilshofsky silver stain. This dye binds specifically to anomalous structures in the nervous system, turning them dark and visible under the concentrated light of the microscope. Alzheimer leans over the brass barrels of his microscope. He adjusts the focus, bringing the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for memory, language, and conscious thought, into sharp relief. The first thing he notices is the sheer devastation of the landscape. The cortex is severely shrunken. It has atrophied, the tissue withered away, leaving gaping voids where healthy brain matter should be. But the silver stain reveals the true culprits. Scattered outside and between the dying nerve cells are dense, dark clumps. They look like scorched earth. These are amyloid plaques, sticky extracellular accumulations of protein debris. But the destruction is not just on the outside. Alzheimer shifts his focus to the interior of the nerve cells themselves. Inside the bodies of the neurons, he sees thick, twisted bundles of dark fibers.
neurofibrillary tangles. The very transport system of the cells has collapsed into knotted threads. He pulls back from the eyepiece. The realization is absolute. The madness of Augusta Detter was not a moral weakness. It was not a punishment, and it was not the natural wearing out of a life. It was a tangible, organic disease with a specific, undeniable physical footprint. Madness has an anatomy. It is driven by plaques and tangles.
It is Saturday, November 3rd, 1906. Alois Alzheimer travels to the medieval town of Tübingen. He is scheduled to present his findings at the 37th Convention of Southwestern German Psychiatrists. He walks into the graceful, wood-paneled auditorium in the Clinic of Psychiatry. Sitting in the rows before him are 88 of his peers, the premier minds of European psychiatry, including the rising child psychologist C.G. Jung. Alzheimer steps to the podium. He presents his paper, titled A Peculiar Severe Disease Process of the Cerebral Cortex. He tells the tragic story of Augusta D. He details her paranoia, her memory loss, her agonizing realization that she was losing herself. He activates the projector. He displays the slides of the shrunken cortex, the amyloid plaques, and the neurofibrillary tangles. He shows them the physical graveyard of a human mind. He finishes his presentation. He steps back, waiting for the barrage of questions. He waits for the room to erupt with the understanding that psychiatric illness can have a visible biological origin.
The reaction is deafening silence. Not a single hand is raised, not a single question is asked. The 88 psychiatrists stare back at him with total, suffocating apathy. They simply do not care. The prevailing winds of European psychiatry are blowing in an entirely different direction. The audience in Tübingen is consumed by the impassioned, fashionable debates over Sigmund Freud and the new field of psychoanalysis. They want to discuss repressed childhood trauma, the meaning of dreams, and curing anxiety with hypnotic sleep. They view the mind as an abstract, psychological space. They have no interest in looking at dead, stained brain cells. The physical brain is dismissed as mere plumbing. The next day, the local newspaper, the Tübinger Chronic, publishes its coverage of the convention. They dedicate columns of text to the fashionable psychoanalytic theories. For Alois Alzheimer's groundbreaking presentation, the journalist writes exactly one laconic sentence. Private docent Dr. Alzheimer reported a curious, severe disease process that caused significant shrinkage of nerve cells within 4.5 years. That is all. The discovery that will eventually dictate the fates of tens of millions of people is buried in a single, dismissive sentence.
Alzheimer does not let the silence stop him. He returns to his laboratory in Munich. He publishes his findings in a short paper, following it up with a deeply detailed account in 1907. Emil Kraepelin, Alzheimer's superior and a titan in the field, recognizes the monumental nature of what his colleague has found. Kraepelin understands that linking a specific clinical behavior to a specific physical pathology is the future of medicine. In 1910, Kraepelin publishes the 8th edition of his massive authoritative handbook of psychiatry. In the chapter on pre-senile and senile dementia, Kraepelin officially gives the condition a name. He calls it Alzheimer's disease. The name cements the legacy of the quiet, methodical doctor who refused to look away from a 51-year-old woman's suffering. But Alois Alzheimer does not live to see the true impact of his work. In August of 1912, he falls ill on a train while traveling to the University of Breslau. A severe streptococcal infection leads to rheumatic fever, ravaging his heart valves. He battles the resulting heart failure for 3 years. On December 19, 1915, Alois Alzheimer dies in Breslau. He is 51 years old, the exact age Auguste Deter was when she first walked up the stone steps of the Frankfurt Asylum. He dies long before his name becomes a household word, a diagnosis feared by millions across the globe. Today, the names of the proteins, beta amyloid and tau, are known to researchers in laboratories from Munich to Tokyo.
The plaques and tangles first illuminated by the Bielszowski-Silver stain are the undisputed hallmarks of a global health crisis. We now know that the disease begins its silent destruction of the brain years, sometimes decades, before the first memory slips away. But this entire paradigm shift, this fundamental redefinition of what it means to age, began with one woman dragging her bedsheets into the cold Frankfurt night. Augusta Detter was not merely a patient, she was the map. Her tragedy, her loss of self, forced the medical world to stop looking at the aging mind as a moral failing or an inevitable decay, and to start looking at the biology of memory. Her terrifying plea, "I have lost myself," so to speak, echoes through the corridors of every research facility currently searching for a cure. She proved that the mind is not a ghost floating independent of the flesh. It is a fragile physical architecture, susceptible to the slow, steady accumulation of plaques and tangles. It took a railway clerk's wife, locked inside the castle of the insane, to show the world that losing your mind is not a failure of character, but a disease of the brain.
This is CARECAST. Exploring the heart of care.